I thought I looked nice in my simple dress, but when the bride's mother looked me up and down and whispered, "Who invited the maid?" I wanted to disappear. Little did she know my husband had been listening from behind the pillar. What happened next left everyone speechless. I thought I looked nice in my simple dress, but when the bride's mother looked me up and down and whispered, "Who invited the maid?" I wanted to disappear. Little did she know my husband had been listening from behind the pillar. What happened next left everyone speechless. Stay with me, because what happens next will blow your mind. Hi, I'm Remy, and this is a story I never thought I'd share with anyone. It's about the day I learned that sometimes the people who seem the most ordinary can surprise you in ways you never imagine. 5 years ago, I married the love of my life, Michael. I'm a third-grade teacher at Lincoln Elementary, and honestly, I wouldn't trade my job for anything in the world. There's something magical about seeing a child's face light up when they finally understand a math problem or finish reading their first chapter book. Michael and we're what you might call simple people. We live in a modest apartment, drive a 10-year-old Honda, and our idea of a fancy dinner is takeout from the Italian place down the street. I shop at Target and TJ Maxx, hunt for clearance sales, and I'm not ashamed to admit I've never owned a designer anything. Michael works in finance at some big corporate firm downtown. He's brilliant with numbers, quiet, and incredibly generous, sometimes too generous for our budget, but that's a story for another day. When the invitation arrived for Jessica's wedding, I felt this flutter of excitement mixed with absolute terror. Jessica was Michael's colleague, and from what I'd heard, this was going to be the wedding of the century. Her family had money, the kind of money that meant country clubs, vacation homes, and cars that cost more than our annual salary. Michael assured me it would be fine, that his co-workers were nice people, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stick out like a sore thumb. The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with me second-guessing everything. What do you wear to a wedding when the bride's engagement ring probably costs more than your car? I spent hours online, researching wedding guest etiquette, scrolling through countless photos of appropriate wedding attire for upscale venues. I must have visited every department store in town, trying on dress after dress, checking price tags, and walking away empty-handed more times than I can count. Finally, I found it. A navy blue dress at Macy's during their semi-annual sale. It was elegant, simple, and after using a coupon, it was something I could actually afford without touching our emergency fund. I paired it with nude heels I already owned and a pearl necklace that had been my grandmother's. Standing in front of our bedroom mirror that morning, I felt pretty good about myself. Michael told me I looked beautiful, kissed my forehead, and promised me everything would be perfect. I wanted so badly to believe him. The venue was in the most exclusive part of town, with valet parking and gardens that looked like something out of a magazine. As we walked toward the entrance, I watched other guests arriving in their luxury cars, the women gliding out in dresses that probably cost more than my monthly rent. My stomach started doing little flips, but Michael squeezed my hand and smiled at me in that way that always made everything seem okay. I had no idea that in just a few hours, that same smile would turn into something I'd never seen before, something that would change everything. Walking into that ballroom felt like entering another world. Crystal chandeliers hung from cathedral ceilings, tables draped in ivory silk with centerpieces that probably cost more than I spend on groceries in a month. The air smelled of expensive perfume and fresh orchids. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that I belonged here because Michael belonged here, and we were a team. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. We found our table, made polite conversation with other guests, and I started to relax. Michael introduced me to several of his coworkers, and everyone seemed genuinely nice. I began to think maybe I'd been worrying for nothing. Jessica looked absolutely stunning in her dress, and during the ceremony, I even teared up a little watching her and her fiancé exchange vows. But then came the reception. That's when I met Mrs. Patterson, Jessica's mother. She approached our table during cocktail hour, flanked by 2 other women who looked like they'd stepped off the pages of a society magazine. Mrs. Patterson was probably in her 50s, with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a burgundy dress that screamed money. The way she carried herself told you immediately that she was used to being the most important person in any room. "You must be Michael's wife," she said, her eyes scanning me from head to toe like she was appraising a piece of furniture at a garage sale. "How quaint." I stood up to shake her hand, trying to ignore the way her gaze lingered on my clearance rack dress. "Yes, I'm Remy. Thank you so much for inviting us. The wedding is absolutely beautiful." "Oh, we didn't exactly invite you," she laughed, a sound like ice clinking in expensive whiskey. "Michael was invited, of course, as one of Jessica's colleagues." She paused, letting that little dig settle. "But I suppose it's nice that he brought help." I felt my cheeks burn. "I'm sorry?" One of her friends, a woman with too much Botox and a smile that never reached her eyes, chimed in. "Oh, Patricia, don't be cruel. I'm sure she's very sweet. Though I have to ask, dear, where did you find that dress? It's so practical." Michael was across the room, deep in conversation with the groom about some work project. He glanced over and waved, completely oblivious to what was happening. I wanted to call out to him, but what would I say? That these women were being mean to me? I felt like I was back in high school, standing alone in the cafeteria. "Department store, I'm guessing?" Mrs. Patterson asked, circling back like a shark who'd smelled blood. "There's nothing wrong with budget-friendly fashion, of course. Not everyone can afford the finer things." Her friend nodded sagely. "Patricia's right, sweetie. You shouldn't feel bad about your limitations. We can't all be born into certain circumstances." She gestured vaguely around the opulent room. "Some of us work with what we have." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Actually, I'm a teacher. I love my job and I'm proud of what I do." "How noble," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Teaching is such important work. Someone has to do the simpler jobs." She exchanged a look with her companions that made me feel about 2 inches tall. "Patricia, you're being charitable," said the third woman, who'd been quiet until now. She had jet black hair and wore enough diamonds to blind someone. But honestly, Michael could do so much better. A man in his position, with his prospects. She shook her head sadly, as if mourning Michael's poor life choices. The words hit me like physical blows. These women didn't even know me, but they'd decided I wasn't good enough based on my dress, my job, my background. I felt tears threatening to spill, and I bit my lip hard to keep them back. "You know," Mrs. Patterson continued, clearly enjoying herself now, "there's a lovely table in the back where the catering staff is sitting. You might feel more comfortable there. More among your peers." That's when I saw Jessica's sister approach. She'd been hovering nearby, clearly listening to everything. "Mom's right," she said with a triumphant smile. "This is a family celebration after all. Perhaps it would be better if—" She gestured toward the back of the room, where indeed several people in dark clothing were seated. I looked around desperately, hoping someone would speak up, but other guests had started to notice the commotion and were pretending not to see. The coward's way out. Look away and pretend ugliness isn't happening right in front of you. My voice came out smaller than I intended. "Those are your wedding guests too, regardless of what they do for work. And I'm here as Michael's wife, not as anyone's employee." "Are you, though?" Mrs. Patterson asked, raising an eyebrow. "Michael's wife?" Because honestly, looking at you two together, well, it's rather obvious this is some kind of charity situation. Maybe he felt sorry for you. You wouldn't be the first pretty young teacher to catch the eye of a successful man who wanted to play hero. The room felt like it was spinning. I gripped the back of my chair so hard my knuckles went white. These women had just reduced my 5-year marriage, my love story, to some kind of pity project. They'd made me feel ashamed of everything I was. My job, my clothes, my background, even my relationship with the man I loved more than anything in the world. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, measured steps that I recognized immediately. Michael's footsteps, but when I turned around, the expression on his face was like nothing I'd ever seen before. His usual gentle demeanor was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. He'd heard everything. Michael walked up behind me and I could feel the energy change in the room. He wasn't the mild-mannered finance guy these women thought they knew. There was something different about him now, something sharp and dangerous that I'd only seen once before. The night someone broke into our apartment building, and he'd stood between me and danger. "Ladies," he said, his voice eerily calm, "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation." Mrs. Patterson turned with that same condescending smile, clearly not sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Oh, Michael, there you are. We were just getting acquainted with your lovely friend." "My wife," he corrected, the word cutting through the air like a blade. "Remy is my wife of 5 years, not my friend, not my charity case, and certainly not someone you can treat like dirt at your daughter's wedding." The diamond-wearing woman laughed nervously. "Oh, Michael, we were just having a bit of fun. You know how women can be when we get together." "No," Michael said, stepping closer to me. "I don't know how women can be. My wife is a woman, and she treats everyone with respect regardless of what they're wearing or how much money they have." He paused, looking each of them in the eye, "which is clearly something you three never learned." Mrs. Patterson's composure cracked slightly. "Now see here, young man. You may work with my daughter, but this is our family's celebration, and we don't appreciate being lectured by—" "By who?" Michael interrupted. "By someone you think is beneath you? Someone who doesn't belong here?" He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. "You know what, Patricia? You're absolutely right. We don't belong here. We should leave." Jessica's sister smirked triumphantly. "Finally, some sense." "But before we go," Michael continued, his finger hovering over his phone screen, "I think Jessica and Kevin should know about this conversation. Don't you think they'd want to know how their family has been treating their guests?" "You wouldn't dare," Mrs. Patterson hissed. "Actually, I would." Michael's thumb moved across his phone. "Jessica? Sorry to interrupt, but could you and Kevin come over here for a moment? There's something we need to discuss." I watched the color drain from Mrs. Patterson's face as Jessica and her new husband approached, both looking concerned. Behind them, other wedding guests had started to gather, drawn by the tension in the air. "What's going on?" Jessica asked, looking between her mother and Michael with confusion. Michael put his arm around me, and I felt some of my strength return. "Jessica, Kevin, I need to speak with you privately. It's about the wedding." Kevin frowned. "Is something wrong with the arrangements? We can fix whatever—" "The arrangements are perfect," Michael said quietly. "Absolutely perfect. The flowers, the venue, the catering, the band, everything exactly as you wanted it." Jessica looked puzzled. "I don't understand. What's this about?" Michael took a deep breath, and I realized I was holding mine. "It's about who paid for all of this." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Mrs. Patterson's face went from pale to white to an odd shade of green. Her friends suddenly found their shoes very interesting to look at. "What do you mean?" Kevin asked slowly. "I mean," Michael said, pulling up something on his phone, "that when Jessica called you 3 months ago, crying because the wedding fund had been wiped out by your father's medical bills and the venue was demanding full payment or they'd cancel." He paused, looking directly at Mrs. Patterson. "She called me for advice." Jessica's eyes went wide. "Michael, you didn't—" "The venue, the catering, the flowers, the band, the photographer, everything. I paid for all of it." He showed them his phone screen, and I could see bank transfer confirmations. Anonymous donation at Jessica's request. She didn't want anyone to know, especially the family, because she was embarrassed. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the stares of everyone who'd gathered around us. Mrs. Patterson looked like she might faint. "You see?" Michael continued, his voice still calm but with an edge that could cut glass. Your mother and her friends here spent the last 20 minutes explaining to my wife how she doesn't belong at this wedding, how she's not good enough to sit with the family, how I could do so much better than a simple teacher who shops at department stores." Jessica started crying. Not the pretty, elegant tears of a bride, but deep, body-shaking sobs. "Mom, what did you do?" "They suggested," Michael went on relentlessly, "that Remy might be more comfortable sitting with the catering staff, that our marriage was some kind of charity situation." His voice got quieter, which somehow made it more terrifying. "They called my wife, the woman I love more than life itself, a charity case." Kevin put his arm around Jessica, his face a mask of anger and embarrassment. "Mrs. Patterson, how could you?" But Michael wasn't done. "The funny thing is, they're right about one thing. This whole wedding, it was charity. My charity. Anonymous, no strings attached, just because I couldn't stand to see my colleague's daughter start her marriage in debt because life had been unfair to her family." Mrs. Patterson finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Michael, we didn't know." "You didn't know because it didn't matter," he said firmly. "It didn't matter who paid for what. What mattered was how you treated another human being, how you treated my wife." He looked around at the gathered crowd. "And now everyone here knows exactly who you really are." The shame on Mrs. Patterson's face was almost painful to watch. Her friends had already started backing away, clearly wanting to distance themselves from the situation. Other guests were whispering, some pulling out their phones. Jessica wiped her eyes and walked over to me. "Remy, I am so sorry. I had no idea they were... I can't believe..." She turned to her mother, her voice shaking with rage. "You humiliated the man who saved our wedding. You humiliated his wife, who I was hoping would become a friend." "Sweetheart, we didn't realize..." Mrs. Patterson started. "You didn't realize what?" Jessica exploded. "That you shouldn't treat people like garbage? That you shouldn't judge someone by their clothes? That you shouldn't insult a guest at my wedding?" The room was dead silent except for Jessica's angry breathing. Even the band had stopped playing. Michael gently touched my arm. "Come on, honey. Let's go home." As we walked toward the exit, I heard Mrs. Patterson call out desperately, "Michael, please! We made a mistake. Don't let this ruin Jessica's special day." Michael turned back one last time, and his voice carried across the entire ballroom. "Mrs. Patterson, I didn't ruin anything. You did that all by yourself." He paused. "Jessica, Kevin, I wish you both all the happiness in the world. You deserve it." And with that, we walked out into the cool evening air, leaving behind the most expensive and most humiliating wedding I'd ever attended. We drove home in silence, both of us processing what had just happened. Finally, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Michael, why didn't you tell me about paying for the wedding?" He pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine. "Because it didn't matter. Jessica needed help. I could provide it. And that was the end of it. I never wanted recognition or gratitude. That's not why you help people." I looked at this man I'd been married to for 5 years, seeing him in a completely new light. "You spent our vacation fund, didn't you? That trip to Europe we've been saving for?" He smiled, that gentle smile I fell in love with. "Remy, we can take a vacation any time. Jessica only gets married once. Well, hopefully." That made me laugh, even though I was crying. "You could have told me. I would have understood." "I know you would have. But I also know you would have insisted on eating ramen for the next 6 months to help save up for it. I didn't want that weight on your shoulders." As we sat in our old Honda in front of our modest apartment, I realized something. Today had taught me that true wealth isn't about designer clothes or fancy venues or how much money you have in the bank. It's about character. It's about kindness when nobody's watching. It's about standing up for the people you love, even when it costs you something. Mrs. Patterson had all the money in the world, but she was bankrupt in the ways that actually matter. My husband, on the other hand, my simple, quiet husband who shops at Target and drives a 10-year-old car, was richer than any of those women could ever dream of being. 3 days later, Jessica called to apologize again. She told me that her mother had been so ashamed she'd barely spoken since the wedding. The story had spread through their social circle like wildfire, and Mrs. Patterson was dealing with the consequences of her actions. Jessica also mentioned that several other wedding guests had reached out to her, sharing their own stories of times when my husband had quietly helped them or their families. Apparently, Michael's generosity was an open secret at his company. Everyone knew he was the guy you could count on, the one who'd anonymously cover medical bills or help with kids' college tuition, never asking for anything in return. I learned something important that day about judging people by their appearance, their clothes, their background. You never know who you're talking to. That quiet person in the simple dress might be married to the man who saved your daughter's wedding. That unassuming guy in the off-the-rack suit might be the one who's keeping your company afloat with his brilliant financial strategies. The most generous hearts often come in the simplest packages. Mrs. Patterson learned that lesson the hard way, in front of 100 wedding guests and probably half of social media by now. As for me, I learned that I married a man whose quiet strength and endless compassion make him more valuable than all the designer clothes and fancy cars in the world. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, when someone tries to make you feel small, life has a funny way of showing them, and everyone watching, just how wrong they really are. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, kindness costs nothing, but its value is immeasurable. And never ever judge a book by its cover. You might just find out that the simple-looking book contains the most beautiful story of all.